Hey y'all, welcome to today's workshop. We are doing a workshop today on how to reduce anxiety by leaning into your kids' interests. This workshop is relevant for both parents and educators, so I hope if you're watching this as a parent or a teacher, you find it helpful. So, what to expect here if you are here live, you can keep your mics, cameras on and put questions in the chat. I'm going to teach for about 35 or 40 minutes and then there'll be Q&A at the end. If you're watching this recorded, that Q&A is cut out for anyone who comes live and you can find these replays on Substack. Replays are for paid subscribers and all of my writing and blogs are for free subscribers. So that is how I structure my Substack to help people have access to everything I write. Okay, so if you are new to me, a little bit about me is that I'm trained as a school psychologist. I worked as a psychologist in Houston, Texas, in public schools there, but I've been a child psychologist in private practice in North Carolina, which is where my home is, for the last 15 to 16 years. I've worked with hundreds of neurodivergent kids and teens over the years in schools and in private practice. And I'm also the parent to two neurodivergent boys, one almost 13 and one 18. And all of those stories and paths and experiences have led me to write my first book, The Neurodivergent Learner, which will be out August 25th. It's already available for pre-sale. So if you want to go ahead and get it and have it be shipped to you or buy it on Audible and have the download come to you, I will be reading the audiobook, so it will be my voice coming to you. You just go to that website at the bottom, learnwithdremily.com/book. Some of the ideas that we talk about today are elaborated on in the book. So if you want to go deeper, I would encourage you to check that out. I have a whole chapter on interests in the book. So I start by reframing neurodiversity and the way that I think about it, just so we're kind of all on the same page. And I think about neurodiversity as we are all neurodiverse as a population, and then some of us are neurodivergent. And what that follows into are these categories, right? So what it means though is an uneven development of some kind. So it could be diagnostically labeled as ADHD, autism, LD, giftedness, or twice exceptionality, where a child is intellectually gifted and has a diagnosis that they need support for. So any of those are going to lead to some uneven skills. But on top of that, most neurodivergent kids and teens and adults experience anxiety. The world is not built for us to do everything in these uneven ways. The world is built for like a standardized way of doing things, which can cause some irritability. So here's some ways that anxiety can show up. Irritability, avoidance, kid doesn't want to do something, sometimes verbal arguing, which is really verbal aggression, but it comes out as arguing, physical aggression, and then we often will think of worries as anxiety, which they are, but sometimes we have what I would call trick worries, which are things that absolutely can't happen. And it's what adults we call irrational fears, like, monsters in our closet, animals, tigers under our bed, those types of things. And kids will reach a certain developmental level where they understand that that's not possible. And so usually we can use humor to help them know that, oh, that's not actually possible. We can't do that. But then as kids get older, they realize that something is possible, like a robbery or failing a test or, things that are actually realistic, but we need to help them either face their fear or understand that it's highly unlikely that that thing could happen. And that could also be a trick worry. So we have to also think about sensory processing because how our bodies process anxiety is also a part of the picture. So this is an area where occupational therapists are trained and specialize in. When you are met with resistance from your kid, think first about sensory needs. Is it too loud? Is it too overwhelming? What are the things that are getting in the way of my kid or maybe making them anxious? And often it can be a sensory avoider, like I don't want to touch that, I don't want to be here, it's too crowded. Now some kids are sensory seekers. Often children with ADHD, they like the rush, they like to run, they like to crash. Those are more sensory seekers. And so it's important to talk to an OT about some of those things if it's interfering with your child's life. But many children with anxiety also have sensory sensitivities when they're younger. So, when we think about anxiety, I want you to think before we get into interest and how to mitigate some of this, I want you to think about these three zones. I love this visual by Dr. Megan Anna Neff, who is an ADHD psychologist who makes this visual based on Dan Siegel's work, where we are learning within this window of tolerance. It's when we are able to be engaged and curious, and when we are pushed to the edges of our window of tolerance, we're irritable, we might be frustrated. We're able to handle it and still be in a group, but we're on the edges of our window of tolerance. This is where kids might storm off or might say something that they don't usually say. But when we're outside of our window of tolerance, this is like tantrum, meltdown, complete shutdown, overwhelm. It's just in the pink, we have big expressive feelings that are moving out. And then in the blue, it's hypo-aroused in our nervous system where all of those feelings are going in. And usually that is a shutdown response. So a child may not be aggressive, but they may be very shut down. So these are all things to notice on this continuum of anxiety that often come out as behaviors, but at the root of it all, it is a dysregulation of emotion. Within neurodivergent populations, kids and teens and adults tend to have a smaller window of tolerance. Someone with a large window of tolerance is going to be really flexible. They're going to go with the flow. They don't get their feathers ruffled very much. But with a small window of tolerance, think about an ADHD kid that gets reprimanded all the time. They're going to be quicker to feel judged, or a sensitive child who, feels like someone talking in a stern tone is yelling. They're going to be more sensitive to that voice and trying to process that person's emotions, and that may interfere with their learning. So there are all kinds of things that can impact a child's anxiety or trigger it or make it worse. So here's just some examples of triggers. We of course want to figure out what are the triggers. We all know that sensitive children can be triggered by a fire drill, but they also can have big feelings to just the plan being changed. Many children, autistic children, as well as those with ADHD, can struggle with transitions. They do really well when things can be expected and the same. For ADHD, it's often because that helps them remember the plan. And for autistic children, it's often because when they know the plan, they can feel in control of their anxiety. Getting out of the car at school is one of those examples of a transition. You have to say no to something, whether that's screen time or buying something, and that can conjure up all of these emotions, and that all is part of your child's anxiety. So in response to that, you may see all of this behavior, right? So you could see physical aggression, which might look like your child throwing something, not talking as much, or saying things in anger. It's this loss of control when what we're asking of them outmatches their skills to regulate. It could also come out as verbal aggression, like I can control my body right now, but not my words in this moment. So I can make words, but they're not nice, they're not kind. I can say how I feel, but I can't problem solve. So often these are not the moments to try to figure things out. We are just keeping kids safe, maybe separating kids if they're being hurtful verbally to others. You're seeing the anger, but there's more going on underneath, and this is all rooted usually in a loss of control. And the answer is not always to give them control. The answer is to help them regulate their emotions even when you do need to set a boundary. So we need to co-regulate with them first and then come up with collaborative solutions. So one of the other ways you'll see anxiety is avoidance. And we're going to talk about that through interest, because a lot of the times that kids will miss out on looking into interest or new activities is because they're scared of new experiences. They're avoiding, and that will look like I'm choosing not to, or I'm non-compliant. But what this is something feels too hard, something feels too anxiety provoking. Their attention span may not fit the task, so it feels very effortful, or the stamina that they need or the processing that they need doesn't fit the activity or the task. So when kids are resistant to something new, even if they're interested in the content, we've got to think about the structure and the people and the timing of things to make sure that it fits their skills as well. If kids feel overwhelmed or trapped, they may engage in negative self-talk. And this is what happens when kids feel like they're trying their best and they don't know what else to do. The expectations are higher than their skills. They don't know how to access their strategies, or they know what to do, but they can't do it. They may feel stuck or inadequate. Sometimes this happens with a combo of anxiety and ADHD because kids will know, I want to do this thing, but I keep forgetting to do this thing. And that makes me anxious that I'm going to forget to do the thing. And it's a negative feedback loop. Sometimes perfectionism, if paired with a skill weakness, let's say with a gifted child who also has a learning disability, they want to get it right, but they still make mistakes. We have to really help them understand that they're not all one thing. They might have one weakness, but that doesn't mean that we're going to, you know, be negative about all the things. They might feel negative about, let's say, reading or being able to remember their work or staying organized, but that doesn't mean they're not good at everything. So we can help them frame that in a different way. I like to try what I call the try it 3 times rule with kids who are resistant to new experiences or resistant to an experience where you really think they're going to like it once they get started. What often will happen with anxious kids and new experiences is that the first time they do it, everything is new and anxiety is really high. So we have to really just expect them to go that first time. Showing up is success. That first time they do something new, they may not engage in anything, they may not notice things. Usually, what I see happen is the second time kids go to stuff, the anxiety comes down a little and they start to notice things. They start to notice people, they start to notice their surroundings, and they begin to either like it or not like it. The third time they go, usually they're starting to put together the structure, the rhythm, the routine of whatever you're doing. They may have been more familiar with the people now, so that anxiety has lowered. By the third time, you really get to know whether it's going to work or not, whether they are going to get out of the car and do the thing, and whether they, some kids will resist at the beginning of the day and then end up having a great time. So after they do it 3 times, talk about it. Decide whether to keep going and maybe give it 6 times, or decide if it's not worth it. And I know that this is really tough when it comes to paying for all of these things, because often you have to pay for the whole camp and maybe not go to the whole thing. But often checking in after 3 times and helping kids just make a pact for, let's just do it 3 times rather than I paid for it, you have to go the whole time. If you can just chunk it and let's do 3 at a time and then talk about it, often that will help it feel doable for kids, and they will be more likely to try something new. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the history and the philosophy of interest development before we dive into how interest can help all that anxiety that I just presented. So we develop interest through 4 phases based on the researchers here that studied this in 2006. So first, we are triggered by an interest just in our environment, usually based on something that's new or something we're curious about, and it's an emerging situational interest. Sometimes we are interested in something that we didn't even mean to get exposed to. And this is why it's so helpful to get kids out and get them to do things, because sometimes they'll be interested in something we did not see coming. I mean, I know that I was surprised when my ADHD kid loved baseball. I thought it was going to be way too slow for him, but he loved figuring out the next play and he was always thinking, and I just didn't see it coming. But exposing him to that was helpful. Then we go through this meaning stage of we maintain an interest because we find it valuable or enjoyable. And then that leads to us re-engaging with it. So we look for more opportunities. We develop an interest. Kids will ask us, can I go back to that? Or they will say, oh, when can I do that again? These are all efforts to re-engage. And then we get to this self-sustaining phase, which is something that becomes a hobby or an interest over time, and it starts to become a part of our identity where we make plans to engage in this thing across settings. So when we travel, we look for these things. When we, are with different people, we're curious if they're into the things we're into. So it starts to expand beyond just that first environment we were exposed to. And this is all really important because we're going from a situational interest, which is that momentary capture of our attention that happens in our environment, to something that is our individual interest that becomes a part of our identity. And this, of course, happens over many, many years for kids. And this, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about neurotypical child development here. And we're going to talk on the next slide about what gets in the way when a child is anxious or is neurodivergent in some way. So we, over time, something may or may not emerge into an individual interest. So where we're putting forth effort to re-engage, to plan things, to find these opportunities across settings. This is the part that we often have to do for our neurodivergent kids and teens. They may be interested in it, but if we don't make it happen for them and plan it and find it and all of that, they usually won't have the executive functioning when they're young or even teens to go out and do that. It's usually around high school that neurotypical kids begin doing this on their own, but we often, as parents of children with executive functioning weaknesses, are doing this for kids into their early 20s, and that is just reality for many of them. So, what interferes with this interest development? So, many kids have a short attention span, so they're going to maybe not spend as much time and effort with something to then gain their skills. Like if you don't really get deep into it so that you get good at the guitar, it feels like a lot of effort all the time and your fingers hurt, right? You have to get past that point of feeling like you can actually play a song and then it's rewarding. But if you have a short attention span, you might not get over that hump. Some kids will have a social weakness and they'll only do their interest with themselves and they won't share that idea with others. Now, for some kids, that is okay and they don't want kids messing with their interest, and that is fine. But as they get older, often that is how kids will make social growth, is they will find someone else that loves their interest and all of a sudden they're socializing about it. But they wouldn't be able to socialize with someone who didn't have their interest. Our kids might have weak planning skills, and that can limit opportunities. Like I said on the previous slide, we have to executive function our kids longer than a neurotypical child. So we have to seek out opportunities and plan these things and prep the people in their life to understand them so that we can hopefully make it a successful experience. And then some kids will hyper focus on something, which could stop them from expanding their interest. Again, not totally a problem in isolation. However, they may not think up other things to do. So in a way, we also have to help expand that beyond this one interest and help them realize what else is out there that they might enjoy. Okay, so when kids get upset, we first have to co-regulate them, which means we have to be regulated, but we're better at co-regulating really little kids because we're wired for that as humans. You know, we know how to pick up a baby and rock a baby, and that feels good. We know what to do. However, once we have big kids and they're still throwing tantrums or they're throwing things or they're throwing themselves on the floor, it's hard to know what to do because we're often thrown off by that. But what's most important is for us to reduce language, at least to match their language. So if they are not talking very much, or if nothing coming out of their mouth is kind, we want to really reduce our language. Align with their sensory needs. So if they're putting hands over ears or they're pushing people away, they need space, they need quiet. Notice what they're seeking out. Increasing access to their interests here is really important. We're going to go deeper in that on the next slide. And we want to join them in doing this. Interests are regulating for big kids. When they are doing the thing that they love, it's not just a treat for them. It is a regulation strategy. We would never want to take an interest away as a punitive consequence because usually a child is using that to regulate. Now, this gets tricky with screen time, right? And there are times where kids are using screen time to regulate, and then there are times when we can take away some screen time to help them understand that they need to focus on something to help them regulate. So this is totally your decision as a parent, and often if you're having trouble with those specific decisions, you need to work with a mental health provider that knows your child to help you figure that out. And once they're regulated, then we need to just restate the problem because they may have forgotten, but trust me, they will remember and problem solve it together. So, here are a few ideas of interests that regulate. I go into each of these in depth in my book through research, through examples. Animals are very regulating for kids with ADHD and kids who have been diagnosed with autism. And many of them love connecting with animals because there's just this emotional regulation connection as well as a rhythm to nature and to animals. Those are intertwined. There's research on getting out in nature and feeling regulated after being in green space versus being on a city street. I think we all know that and can feel that, but we've got research on it. In terms of movement together, we all know that movement regulates our bodies. So often it's just the getting up and going, starting with walks. Music and art are also regulating in a creative way. So it's using a completely different part of our brain than some of the more academic ways that we use our brain. And so creating music and art or looking at it, experiencing music and art is something that can really have a calming, regulating effect on everyone, but especially on neurodivergent kids. And you're probably thinking, well, what about special interests? So really specific interests that kids have. One of the first questions I ask on my intake form when I'm working with families is, what is your kid's interest? Because that's what lights them up. That's what is regulating for them. And it, like I said, it's not just a treat. It's not just like you did so great, so we can go do this thing now. It's a strategy to help regulate them. It can reduce their anxiety because what it does is helps them feel connected to something that they love. I have a colleague who says engaging in interest is like breathing for some of these kids. It is something that, like, when we say, oh, you speak my language, it's a connection for them that they're not feeling from other things in their environment. It can increase socialization with other people who share those interests. It increases their confidence because many of them know so much about these things, and other people love to listen to all of the things that they know. And then it can help them make connections. It also distracts them with joy. And what I mean by that is when they're frustrated, when they're having opposite of joy feelings, it can often distract them out of those negative feelings. And that's what I mean by reducing anxiety. It's regulating. This joy is regulating for them. And they spend a lot of time feeling like things aren't going well. So we have to help them have balance and have these things in their life that they absolutely love. So I want you to think about the takeaways here are that interests develop over time and exposure for all of us. And that's true for neurotypical people as well as neurodivergent people. But neurodivergent kids and teens really need our support. They need our routines. They need our structure. They need our executive functioning to help them figure out how to try new things and stick with them enough that they can then reflect and have some insight onto how it's going. Or if they're not able to identify it, that you're pretty clear that no, this isn't just anxiety about getting started. Something's not right about this activity. Something's not aligned about this activity. And you should know by like really after the third or fourth time that they do something. Incorporating interests is regulating for kids and necessary for neurodivergent learners. It is not only a treat that we give them, it is a necessary strategy that needs to be incorporated into their life. Okay, so if you want to keep learning with me, all of the ways that you can learn for free are all my blogs and writing on Substack, my podcast, and then my social media, of course. And then the paid level of Substack will get you all the workshop replays. There are now, I believe, 24 workshop replays. Some are about school, some are about summer, some are about family, all across the spectrum of ADHD, twice exceptional, and autistic learners. And then paid subscribers also get access to me in between workshops in the private chat where we can talk about different topics and everyone shares strategies there. And then if you are watching this workshop and it's the summer of 2026, my book is on pre-order now. And if you pre-order it, you can also get this chapter on interests for free. So if you go to my Substack there, you'll find information on how to redeem that pre-order for getting this chapter straight to your inbox. It's chapter 9 in my book, and I hope you enjoy it and read it early. Again, the book will come out August 25th, so you will have a preview. All right, now we are going to go into Q&A.